2 weeks since missing Houston woman Deundrea Ford was last seen leaving work. It's a story you saw first here.
She had just finished her shift. Another long night at Diva's Bikini Bar and Grill. The clock neared 1:30 a.m. as 22-year-old Deundrea Ford stepped outside into the night, her figure captured on surveillance footage. She walked toward a white Ford Transit van, climbed inside, and then nothing. She was never seen alive again. Her family waited for a call, a message, anything. But as the hours stretched into the morning, an uneasiness crept in. This wasn't like Deundrea. She always came home. She had a son to care for. By the next day, worry turned into dread. They reported her missing, and the search began. At first, it was a simple disappearance, one of many in a city where people go missing far too often. But as investigators began digging, they uncovered a tangled web of secrets, threats, and a history that suggested Deundrea Ford was in danger long before she stepped into that van. Deundrea Ford's story didn't begin on the night she vanished. It started years earlier in Houston, Texas, where she was born on October 24, 2001. Like any young girl, she had dreams, hopes, and plans for the future. But life had a way of shaping her path differently than she might have expected. At just 16 years old, she became a mother, bringing a baby boy into the world. It was a turning point, a moment that forced her to grow up quickly. She was still a child herself, yet she had no choice but to take on the weight of responsibility, to provide, to protect, to survive. Raising a child at such a young age meant sacrifices. It meant finding ways to support herself and her son, even when options were limited. As she grew older, she found work as a dancer at Diva's Bikini Bar and Grill, a club that catered to late-night crowds in Houston. It wasn't easy. The job came with its own risks, unwanted attention, unpredictable customers, and an environment where trust was often a fragile thing. But it paid the bills. It allowed her to take care of her son. Yet, beneath the surface of her everyday struggles, there was another layer to Deundrea's life, something that placed her in an even more dangerous position. Just months before she disappeared, she found herself entangled in a situation that would put a target on her back. In May 2023, she and another woman had traveled to Louisiana for work. What was supposed to be just another trip took a deadly turn when a man named Otis Parker was shot and killed in what authorities later described as a planned robbery. Deundrea, whether by choice or circumstance, had witnessed something that made her a crucial part of the investigation. She became a key witness in a capital murder case. And in the months that followed, as the case progressed, chilling messages began to surface. Messages that suggested someone was watching her, that someone didn't want her to feel safe. Asterisk, she ain't safe in Houston at all. Asterisk, it was more than just a warning. It was a threat. And as the days passed, that threat loomed over her life like a shadow. But whether she realized how close danger truly was, no one can say for sure. All that's certain is that on the night of September 22nd, 2023, Deundrea Ford left her job, stepped into a white van, and was never heard from again. The night of September 22nd, 2023, seemed like any other for Deundrea Ford. She had spent hours inside Diva's Bikini Bar and Grill, working, dancing, making a living the only way she knew how. The club was alive with music, flashing lights, and the constant movement of people coming and going. But as the night wore on, the crowd thinned, and the energy inside began to die down. By 1:30 a.m., it was time to leave. Stepping outside, Deundrea walked into the warm Texas night. The air was thick, the streets still humming with the last remnants of nightlife. She made her way toward a white Ford Transit van parked nearby, where an unknown man was waiting. She climbed inside, the doors shut, and just like that, she was gone. The minutes turned into hours. The sun rose, and Houston awakened to a new day. But Deundrea was nowhere to be found. She hadn't returned home, hadn't called, hadn't answered her phone. It was unusual. It was unsettling. Her family knew her routine. She might have worked late, but she always checked in. She always came home to her son. Concern turned to panic as calls went unanswered. Text messages sat unread. The silence stretched into the afternoon, then into the evening. Something was wrong. Her family didn't hesitate. They went to the police, and reported her missing. At first, the response was what many families of missing adults hear. Maybe she left on her own. Maybe she needed space. Maybe she would turn up. But they knew better. Deundrea had no reason to disappear. She had a child depending on her, a family who would have heard from her by now. This wasn't just a case of someone going off the grid. Something had happened. As police began looking into the case, the first real lead emerged. The last known sighting of Deundrea had been caught on surveillance. The grainy footage showed her entering the van, willingly, with the man inside. There was no sign of struggle, no immediate indication that anything was wrong. But what happened after the doors closed? That was the question haunting everyone. She never made another call. She never sent another message. From that moment forward, Deundrea Ford had vanished. As the hours passed with no sign of Deundrea, the search intensified. Her family pressed the authorities for answers, refusing to let her case be brushed aside as just another missing person. The Houston Police Department began their investigation, retracing her last known steps, speaking to those who had seen her that night, and analyzing the surveillance footage that captured the moment she entered the white Ford Transit van. At first, there was little to go on. The footage was clear enough to confirm that she had entered the vehicle willingly. But beyond that, it provided no real clues. The man inside remained unidentified. There was no way to tell what had happened once the door shut, no sign of where the van had gone next. But detectives knew one thing. Time was not on their side. As they dug deeper into Deundrea's past, they uncovered a disturbing detail that shifted the investigation. She wasn't just a missing woman. She was a woman with enemies. The capital murder case from earlier in the year resurfaced. Deundrea had been a key witness in the killing of Otis Parker, a man gunned down in a planned robbery in Louisiana. She had been there. She had seen what happened. And someone had made it clear that they hadn't forgotten. Asterisk, she ain't safe in Houston at all. Asterisk, the message was chilling. It wasn't vague. It wasn't a warning. It was a direct threat, a declaration that Deundrea Ford was being watched, that she wasn't out of harm's way. Investigators now had to ask themselves, was her disappearance connected to that case? Had someone silenced her before she could testify? But as the search continued, another lead emerged, one that pointed to a different kind of danger. The unknown man in the van was finally identified. His name was Yoland J. Washington. At 51 years old, Washington wasn't just some random stranger. He had a history, a past filled with violent encounters, particularly against women who worked in the same industry as Deundrea. He had been arrested before robbery, assault, crimes that showed a pattern. And now he was the last person seen with Deundrea Ford. It was a turning point in the case. Investigators weren't just looking for a missing woman anymore. They were chasing down a predator. Yoland J. Washington wasn't an unfamiliar name to law enforcement. At 51 years old, his past was riddled with violent crimes, particularly against women. He wasn't just a man with a troubled history. He was a predator who had spent years preying on those he perceived as vulnerable. Women who worked in nightclubs, dancers, sex workers. These are the ones he targeted. His pattern was clear, his past offenses a disturbing roadmap of what he was capable of. He had been arrested before. Robbery, assault. Charges that painted a picture of a man who had no regard for the safety or well-being of the women he encountered. But as is too often the case, those arrests hadn't stopped him. He remained free, moving through the shadows, finding his next victim. And on the night of September 22nd, 2023, that victim was Deundrea Ford. Washington had been at Diva's Bikini bar and grill that night, blending into the scene like any other customer. Maybe he had been watching her, waiting for the right moment. Or maybe it was something that happened in the spur of the moment, an invitation, a conversation that led to her willingly stepping into his van. What investigators couldn't yet determine was whether Deundrea had known who he really was. Had she seen him before? Had he been to the club on other nights? Or was she simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, crossing paths with a man who had no intention of letting her go? What they did know was that Washington's past was littered with red flags, each one a warning that had been ignored. Women like Deundrea, women working late, trying to make a living, try to survive, had been hurt by him before. And now, as detectives pieced together his movements, they feared the worst. Because Yoland J, Washington wasn't just some ordinary man who had given Deundrea a ride that night. He was the last person to see her alive. And if his past was any indication, whatever had happened in that van wasn't accidental. As the days stretched into weeks, investigators pursued every lead, determined to track down the man last seen with Deundrea Ford. The search had expanded beyond Houston, reaching other states as law enforcement agencies coordinated their efforts. The breakthrough came when deputies in Amherst County, Virginia, received an alert about a vehicle, a white Ford Transit van. It was the same van that had been captured on surveillance footage the night Deundrea disappeared. The moment they spotted it, they moved in. The driver was none other than Yoland J. Washington. He didn't resist. There was no high-speed chase, no dramatic standoff. He was taken into custody without incident, his demeanor calm, almost indifferent. But when questioned about Deundrea, he had an explanation ready. According to Washington, there was nothing sinister about what had happened that night. He admitted to meeting Deundrea at the club. Yes, she had gotten into his van. Yes, they had spent time together. But according to him, that was where the story ended. He claimed he had simply dropped her off later that night, that whatever had happened after that had nothing to do with him. It was a story investigators had heard before, the kind of excuse that placed blame on circumstances rather than accountability. But the evidence was already stacking against him. The search of the van changed everything. Inside, investigators found clothing with what appeared to be bloodstains. The discovery was unsettling, raising more questions than answers. Who did the blood belong to? How had it gotten there? Was this the proof they needed to confirm what Deundrea's family had feared all along? There were other items, too, objects that suggested something far worse had taken place inside that van. Foul play wasn't just a possibility anymore. It was becoming the only logical conclusion. Washington's calm exterior began to crack as detectives pressed him further. His version of events no longer seemed to hold up against the growing evidence. And yet he stuck to his story, insisting that he had nothing to do with Deundrea's disappearance. But investigators weren't convinced. They had seen this pattern before. A predator feigning innocence, pretending to be just another man caught in unfortunate circumstances. Yet, no matter how much Washington denied involvement, the evidence inside that van told a different story. And soon, that story would only get darker. Nearly a year had passed since Deundrea Ford vanished. Her family had spent every agonizing day hoping for answers, fearing the worst, but clinging to any shred of hope that she might still be alive. Investigators had worked tirelessly, following leads, questioning those who might have known something, trying to piece together what had happened after she entered Yoland Washington's van. But as time dragged on, the case remained shrouded in uncertainty. Then, on September 18, 2024, nearly a full year after Deundrea was last seen, a grim discovery was made in Dallas. Workers clearing debris near a culvert stumbled upon something unexpected: human remains. The site was isolated, tucked away from the city's bustling streets, a place no one would casually pass by. It was the kind of location someone would choose if they wanted to hide something or someone permanently. Law enforcement was immediately called to the scene. The area was cordoned off, investigators carefully combing through every inch of the site, knowing that what they had found could be the answer to the mystery that had plagued Deundrea's family for nearly a year. But confirmation wouldn't come quickly. The remains had been exposed to the elements for an extended period. Time had stripped away the details, making identification a challenge. For days, the Ford family waited for news. The possibility of closure loomed, but so did the fear of what that closure would mean. And then on September 25th, the Dallas County Medical Examiner delivered the answer no one wanted to hear. The remains were Deundrea's. The confirmation sent waves of grief through those who had fought so hard to find her. She had been out there all this time, discarded, forgotten by the one who had taken her life, but never by those who loved her. The question now wasn't just about who was responsible. They already had their suspect in custody. Now, they needed to know what had happened to her in those final moments. But that answer wouldn't come so easily. The condition of her remains made it difficult to determine the exact manner of her death. There were no obvious, immediate indicators, no single piece of evidence that could tell the full story of how her life had been taken. And that only deepened the pain. Knowing she was gone was devastating enough. But not knowing how it happened, not being able to say with certainty what she had endured, left an unbearable void. Still, one fact was undeniable. Deundrea Ford hadn't disappeared on her own. She hadn't simply walked away from her life, from her son, from everything she knew. Someone had taken her, and now it was time for justice to be served. With the discovery of Deundrea Ford's remains, the legal system moved swiftly to hold Yoland J. Washington accountable. Already in custody at the Dallas County Jail on unrelated charges, Washington now faced the grave accusation of murder. The court set his bond at a staggering $1.1 million, reflecting the severity of the crime and the potential threat he posed to the community. Washington's criminal history painted a troubling picture. Prior arrests for robbery and assault, particularly against women involved in sex work, highlighted a pattern of violent behavior. This history not only underscored the potential danger he represented, but also played a pivotal role in the prosecution's strategy. Demonstrating a consistent pattern of targeting vulnerable women strengthened their case, suggesting that Ford's murder was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader continuum of violence. As the legal proceedings unfolded, the community and Ford's family remained vigilant, seeking justice for Deundrea. The trial's current status is a focal point of public interest, with many awaiting updates on court dates and proceedings. The case serves as a stark reminder of the dangers faced by women in vulnerable professions and the importance of a justice system that holds perpetrators accountable. While the wheels of justice turn, the memory of Deundrea Ford endures, symbolizing both the personal loss experienced by her family and the broader societal imperative to protect those at risk. The upcoming trial of Yoland J. Washington stands as a testament to the community's commitment to seeking justice and ensuring that such tragedies are neither forgotten nor repeated. The confirmation of Deundrea Ford's death shattered her family in a way that no words could fully express. For nearly a year, they had fought to keep hope alive, praying that somehow, against all odds, she would be found safe. Now, that hope had been extinguished. What remained was grief, raw, unrelenting, and accompanied by an ache that would never truly fade. Her mother, who had spent sleepless nights searching for answers, now had to prepare for something no parent should ever have to face: burying her child. Her young son, who had spent much of his life without his mother's presence, would now grow up without ever getting the chance to know her beyond faded photographs and distant memories. The pain rippled through the family, leaving wounds that no form of justice could ever completely heal. But it wasn't just the family who mourned Deundrea. The community, shaken by her disappearance and devastated by the discovery of her remains, came together in an overwhelming display of solidarity. Candlelight vigils were held in her honor, the soft glow of flames illuminating the faces of those who had prayed for her safe return. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers gathered to speak her name, refusing to let her be forgotten. Many saw her story as a painful reflection of a larger, systemic issue. Women, particularly those in vulnerable professions, faced constant danger, yet their disappearances too often went unnoticed, their cases sometimes dismissed or ignored until it was too late. Deundrea's fate reignited conversations about the need for greater protections, the importance of taking threats seriously, and the urgent necessity of ensuring that no one simply vanishes without a trace. For those closest to her, justice would never be enough. A conviction, a prison sentence. None of it could bring Deundrea back. But as they stood together in the face of loss, one thing was certain: her story would not be forgotten. Her name would not be lost in the passage of time. And the fight for justice would continue, not just for her, but for every woman whose voice had been silenced. The story of Deundrea Ford is one that should never have happened. A young mother, taken far too soon, her life cut short in circumstances that should have been preventable. But now that the truth has come to light, the question remains: what can be done to stop tragedies like this from happening again? Her case is not just a story. It's a wake-up call. It forces us to ask difficult questions. How can we protect those who are most at risk? What steps can communities take to make sure that when someone goes missing, the response is swift and effective? How do we ensure that threats are taken seriously before it's too late? And perhaps most importantly, How can the justice system do more to prevent repeat offenders, especially those with histories of violence against women, from claiming more victims? These are conversations that need to happen, and your voice matters. What do you think? How should society address these issues? What changes need to be made? Share your thoughts in the comment section. Let's bring attention to cases like Deundrea's, because no one should ever be forgotten. If you found this story important, if you believe in seeking justice for victims, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep these stories alive, ensuring that cases like Deundrea Ford's are heard, remembered, and never ignored.